I needed to do everything I could to help the Latter-day Saints understand and love the Old Testament as much as possible.
I have the ability to share and inspire people with literature and history, but then also financially be able to help those less fortunate.
But we found that the Lord needed us, and I think there's a reason why we were there when we were there.
Hello and welcome to Latter-day Profiles. I'm Brian Howard. We're here at the LDS Motion Picture Studio in Provo, Utah. And joining me today is Reid Moon from Moon's Rare Books. Reid, welcome. It's so good to have you here today.
It's good to be here.
We're going to tease everybody. Reid has some amazing collections you're going to stick around and see. Sometimes people hear books and it's like, oh, books, but you want to stick around for these. They're pretty amazing things. You've been here in Provo, I think, for about 7 years. I think we talked about before
7
that
years,
in Texas.
yes.
How do you get started, especially collecting books and finding rare books? We talked a little bit before. You were into books because our family had a bookstore back in Texas.
Yes, growing up, we had a small church bookstore, a service to the local community, and it was a hobby. A bookstore in the 1980s was very simple. Some scriptures, a few Jack Whalen and Jorgensen novels, and My Turn on Earth and Saturday Warrior cassettes. That was it. But I came back from college, graduated from BYU, and my family had a large insurance agency, but we had this bookstore still over in the corner. And it didn't take me long to figure out that I much rather preferred to talk to people who were looking for books rather than trying to sell insurance. And a year went by and I told my dad, I think I would rather sell books than insurance. And he goes, I don't think you'll ever make a living selling books. We've had the bookstore for 10 years. It can't even pay its bills. I spent another year doing both, but after 2 years I said, books is really my passion. This is what I want to do. And that's how all this got started.
How did you get started actually collecting, finding, especially the rare books?
Well, back in the 80s, pre-internet, people would come into the bookstore every day asking for books that were out of print, and I would write it down on an index card. And on my trips to Utah, I would hit all of the DIs and used bookstores, fill up boxes of books, and ship them back. But my budget back then was any book under $5. And so that's how it started, because I did not inherit any money, and so I had to be very frugal. And before long, I had 1,000 used books in our inventory, and that was kind of the basis. And as time went by, it went to $10 books, then $20 books, and then a $100 book. And after maybe 7 or 8 years, my first $1,000 book, and then it's gone up from there.
What was the impetus to come from Texas and come here to Provo?
Well, mostly for acquisitions. Specializing in early church history, it's very important to be based here. I'm more likely to get a phone call with an 801 area code versus a 214, Texas. And I found myself, I ended up, 2005, I could see the writing on the wall. New books were dying with the advent of Kindle, ebook, digital. And I started focusing more on the used and rare books. And I ended up selling my store in Dallas, and for 2 years I just did online, and I would travel around, and I found myself passing through Utah 3-4 times a month. I was spending a tremendous amount of time here. And finally I said, if I'm based here, I can cut my travel down substantially, and 7 years ago, moved to Provo.
There you are. Do you remember what was maybe one of the first real big finds? This is a great treasure hunt. This is great.
Well, I went on a trip to the UK, and I was looking through a bookstore, and I found a Bible, 1589, sitting on the shelf. I was surprised it wasn't under glass. I picked it up, and the price was 300 pounds and $450, and I bought it. I was just fascinated with it. Brought it back, had no intentions of selling it, but I had it at the bookstore, and somebody saw it, and they said, wait, what's that? I said, it's a 400-year-old Bible. And they go, wow, I've always wanted one. How much? And I didn't really think about it. And I said, $1,250. And they go, wow, I thought it'd be more, I'll buy it. And that was kind of the beginning of, ooh, maybe I can sell a few of these higher priced books.
At this point, you are well known in the trade, so people know who you are. Did it take a while to work into that? So you
Absolutely, yes.
Get people contacting you?
Yes, but when you travel around, you get to be known. There are book fairs around the world, London, Paris, New York, California, and before long they get to know that you are serious about the business, and they will often contact you when they find books that are in your area of interest.
Is there, now when you go around looking, are you mainly looking for something, or is there still maybe that diamond in the rough, like that first Bible that you found?
Every time people ask me, what am I looking for? And I say, I recognize it when I see it. It fills a gap, a need. And also, just from my experience, I know just how rare something is when I do see it.
Well, let's talk about some of, especially the collection you have with early LDS history. You brought some with you. It's so kind of you to do that. I think one of the amazing things about Reid's bookstore is that actually you can see stuff and hold it out and look at it. And I think that's really amazing. Probably what draws a lot of people to come to this.
When
store.
people walk in, their first perception is that it's a museum, and we tell people that we are basically a museum disguised as a bookstore. And it's very interactive. The people who work there are more like docents in a museum. They are there to educate, entertain those who come in. And we have about 30,000 people a year pass through the bookstore. So we've had people from all 50 states and over 50 foreign countries pass through our bookstore in the past few years.
Yeah, and if you're wondering, Moon's Rare Books, check it out, and there's some amazing things. Early church history is amazing. Was that a focus when you started out, or did that come about because of some acquisitions?
Early church history was always my area of interest, but I could never afford the more important books. And for most people, the holy grail of early church history is a first edition copy of the Book of Mormon. There were originally 5,000 copies printed. Only a few hundred have survived. But if you can find one of those copies that belonged to one of the important early church members, that's even better. And over the past few decades, well, actually, really the past 10, 12 years, that's what I've found. Because how about I show you?
Yeah, let's do some show and tell. I had totally fun. I went to, yesterday I was able to visit you at the store, museum store, which was totally fun. And you were able to share some great things. So yeah, please, let's see. You brought some things along. Let's do some show and tell. What would you like to share with us? Well,
why don't we start out? We're talking about a first edition copy of the Book of Mormon. And there it is, very simple. And some people will be wondering, if that's so valuable, why aren't you using white gloves? Well, the Smithsonian recently published an article saying they've quit using white gloves because more damage has been done using them. You lose your grip, the cotton fibers catch the corners of the pages. The recommendation is to wash your hands, and it takes a couple of hours for the oils to come back. And so, and I go to book fairs around the world, you won't see one white glove. So,
just have clean hands.
Clean hands.
That's right.
Pure heart.
And a pure heart.
Yes, yes. So this is a very well-worn book, and I would love if there was some type of GPS tracker who would tell you everywhere it's been. But absent that, from looking on the inside, we actually know this is the first edition copy of the Book of Mormon that belonged to the very first missionary, Samuel Smith. So Samuel Smith took this book on his mission, and so it's absolutely one of my favorites because his first day on his mission, he's rejected by everybody and ends up sleeping under an apple tree, and this book is there with him. And he was very proud of his association with his brother, and he would open this book and tell people, my brother translated this book by the gift and power of God, and I'm one of the witnesses. And on the witness page, he stars and underlined his name, saying, look, this is me. I'm Samuel H. Smith, and this is my book. And so there is very, very few books that are going to top that in early church history.
What's amazing, the book itself is amazing to have here, but the stories that go with it, that's the richness of it. And I think you shared, maybe you shared with me, was it the second day that he gave a Book of Mormon or sold a Book of Mormon to a traveler that turned out to be someone special?
Well, he went a couple of weeks into his mission, he walked into the Tomlinson Inn, and it was a kind of a stagecoach hub, and people were eating food, waiting for the stagecoach, and he saw a man sitting by himself, and he took out a copy out of his knapsack, walked over to that man and says, "Sir, I have a book you should read." And the man said, "Pray tell, what book would that be?" And he said, "It's the Book of Mormon, but most people are calling it the Golden Bible." And when he said Golden Bible, this lay preacher knew exactly what he was talking about, and he wanted a copy. And that lay preacher acquired that copy with the purpose of going through, reading it, finding the errors, and sharing it with his fellow congregation. And when he took it home and read it in a week, to read this book in a week, you have to read 3 to 4 hours a day. And he read it in a week. And when he told his wife, "I haven't found anything yet," she told him to read it a second time. And he read it a second time. And when he told her that he felt that actually it was true, then it was shared with the family, including that man's younger brother, Brigham Young. So that was Phineas Young that was in the shop. And Samuel returned from his mission not having had any baptisms, but Brigham Young's best friend was Heber C. Kimball. And he planted the seeds on that first mission of bringing the two of the most stalwart apostles, and then future president of the church, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball.
Yeah, very inspiring for missionaries who might not think things are going quite like planned. So it's been happening since day one with Samuel Smith.
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, and after acquiring this, I was fortunate enough to acquire Hiram's copy. And Hiram was very proud of his book, and if you open it up, it says Hiram Smith's book. Now, this is not the copy referred to in section 135 where he folds down the leaf. That is his 1841 copy. And I've been privileged to have that in my hand on several occasions. But this is his first edition. And this has an equally fascinating story. This book was acquired by Hiram Smith, but he ended up selling it at the request of Reynolds Cahoon. Reynolds Cahoon and Hiram Smith were counselors to Newell K. Whitney. And then Reynolds Cahoon gives it to his son, Pulaski Cahoon. And Pulaski does not go west in 1846. He returns to Missouri. And this book disappears for 150 years. It surfaces a little over a decade ago with a family who are not members of the church, but they have kept it safe for 150 years. And I have all of the documentation, and the documentation of the book is called the provenance. What's the provenance? Well, the provenance on this book is spectacular because it ends up that this Pulaski Cahoon, after the Emancipation Proclamation, gave this Bible to some of the slaves that he had. He said, I want to help you out. Here's linen, china, crystal, and take this book as your family Bible. And he gave it away. And that family kept that book safe for 150 years. Now, the last survivor of that family had no children. And she said, when I die, this family comes to an end, and I want this book to go back closer to where it started, to someone who will love, appreciate, and cherish it much as my family has. And then she said, and I don't think you know this part, but she says, I want my prized possessions to stay with that. And what were her prized possessions? I have it right here. She says, I would like the photographs of my ancestors who originally acquired this book to stay with the book. And so we've honored that promise, and those will always stay with the book.
What a great story. And most books, do they have that type of history that you can find?
It's rare, but that's what makes a book interesting. The more history you know about the book, the more interesting it is.
And just more valuable, sentimental, and probably monetary as well.
Absolutely.
What you know about it. Oh, that's an incredible story. All right, we're waiting for what's next and to come out of the bag of tricks they have over there.
Well, Samuel, Hiram, we have to talk about Joseph.
Yes.
The first edition Book of Mormon was printed in Palmyra in 1830. The second edition, Kirtland, 1837. The third edition was Nauvoo. And the Book of Mormon also went small after the first edition because missionaries were taking it out. But this is a Nauvoo edition of the Book of Mormon, but it's also Joseph Smith's copy. So really, in the realm of collecting early church history, you cannot beat Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, and Samuel Smith's copies of the Book of Mormon.
What feeling do you get as you hold them and look through this? Is it, for me, it's like a connection with the past. It makes these people a little bit more real.
Well, absolutely. And the more history you know, we know that in Nauvoo, Joseph gave his most famous sermon, the King Follett Discourse. I can't help but think that that's in his pocket when he's giving this. I don't know that, but it's his copy of the Book of Mormon when he's in Nauvoo.
Yeah. Well, there's all those famous pictures of him holding, and you think, oh, maybe that's he's doing his preaching and he's holding that book. That's an amazing treasure.
So, and I would say the highlight of my early church history collection is that I've been able to acquire a few by loan, but mostly by acquisition, scriptures belonging to every president of the church except President Nelson. And those are absolutely some of the most enjoyable. I spend a lot of time with them. And it finally hit me that I have spent more time with the prophets' scriptures than anybody except the prophets themselves. And in the 19th century, it wasn't the practice to mark up the scriptures. Although Wilford Woodruff began doing that, and even a Doctrine and Covenants I have that belongs to Brigham Young has annotations. But by the time you get to the 20th century, to Heber J. Grant and Harold B. Lee, Spencer W. Kimball, they have marked theirs up. And Ezra Taft Benson, they have really marked their scriptures up. And it is fascinating to go through page by page, see which scriptures they marked.
What have you learned as you've been able to spend time with the prophets by going through their scriptures?
Well, let me just, here's a Bible that belonged to Harold B. Lee. Harold B. Lee is from Idaho. He was from Clifton, Idaho, and the young men, young women, and back then they called it the Young Men and Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association, gave him this copy of the book, and that's what the inscription says. He took this on his mission, and I've been through every page, and I have found out which books he has marked. And I found it very interesting that of the top 4 books, 2 were in the New Testament and 2 were in the Old Testament. He marked 245 verses in the book of Matthew. And then the number 2 book was Old Testament, the book of Psalms, 220 verses in the book of Psalms. But the biggest surprise for me was that in the book of Job, he marked 144 verses. And I thought, wow, did he have a tough mission? But when you go back to the 1920s, it was the average missionary baptized 1 person in 2 years. And if we go to the middle of his book, he recorded baptisms, and that page is filled, and it goes to the next page. He had 44 baptisms. And he said that 35 of them were just tracting and knocking on doors. And so that's just a little snippet of one of the presidents of the church from his mission. And I think it's no surprise that about 19 years after his mission, he's called to be one of the apostles.
That's a great insight to see all those people's names and kind of wonder where are they now kind of thing as you go through that.
But I have to say that one of my favorites, and probably the one I've spent the most time, is with Spencer W. Kimball, who was the president of the church when I went on my mission to Bolivia. And but there's every page practically is filled with he'd love to use red, and I can only find 8 pages in all of this where he hasn't marked a scripture. And in the Book of Mormon, there are over 1,000 notations in the margins. So I love to go take this to church and sit in back, and when the teacher may ask a question, I just open it up and say, well, the president of the church said this, and there it is right there.
That's a powerful tool to get your attention in Sunday school.
Yes.
That's amazing. What I know you got some more things over there, but as you've gone through these, having actual objects can help you to make it real. But as far as testimony building, how does it help you? How does it, what difference does it make? How does that figure in with your testimony of the gospel?
Well, besides owning books, I've read their biographies. I've been told stories by the family. And to have it, it brings it a couple of things. One, I realize they mark scriptures just like we have marked our scriptures. It's different every time. But I also realize that many of these individuals faced challenges throughout their life, and it creates a greater love for these early members of the church, and also for some of the lesser known. We focus on Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Samuel Smith, but he had 3 sisters. There were 3 sisters we don't hear a lot about. But I was fortunate enough to acquire a family Bible that belonged to Sophronia. Now, people ask me all the time, if you could only find one book, what's the Holy Grail out there? And I would say I would love to find the Bible that Joseph Smith was reading when he read James 1:5, which would have been his parents' Bible from the 1700s. They began printing Bibles in America in 1791. That's what it would have been, but to this day, it has not been located. So this is the earliest Smith family Bible. And Sophronia is older than Joseph. She was born between Hiram and Joseph in 1803, and this Bible has that genealogy right here. But probably the most interesting thing in this Bible is her tribute to her brothers. Mother Smith, Sophronia, lost almost all of the men in their family in a very short space. They had lost Alvin early on. But the last, you have, by the time they get to Nauvoo, Father Smith, he dies. Don Carlos dies. And then you have Joseph and Hiram die. And then Samuel, within a few weeks after that, due to his exertion in trying to go help his brothers. And if we open this book up, there's a tribute to her 3 brothers in James 1:5. She cut off locks of hair of Joseph, Hiram, and Samuel and placed them there in the Bible. And so this is absolutely one of my favorite treasures. That brings you very close to
how much she valued and treasured them and wanted that memory of them as well.
And there's numerous stories that we don't have time to go into showing her loyalty and her desire to help further the restoration in the gospel.
We only have a couple minutes left. I know there's at least one more treasure that you'd like to share, and that is, I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And you obviously are as well. What do you have that we would appreciate as Tolkien fans?
Well, I think it would surprise a lot of people. The Hobbit came out in 1937, but at any given time, you can look at an online database of 1 billion books, and there is not one for sale. It's one of the most sought after books of the 20th century. But recently, I tracked down a copy. And there it is. So that in itself was good enough for me, but the fact that this copy is signed by J.R.R. Tolkien, who has one of the most iconic signatures of all time, makes it one of my absolute favorite acquisitions. And I've resisted many a temptation to sell it because I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. And so I love literature. I love meeting people, and I love to see the look on people's faces after I share a story and then actually pull out an artifact that ties to it. And we have received numerous emails and letters and just verbal comments of appreciation to actually see history brought to life. And it's very rewarding. And I'm one of the lucky people who never has to retire. Because if I retired, I would do what I'm doing, which is a treasure hunt.
And one of the things I really appreciate, excuse me, is what you do is that you let young men's, young women's groups, missionary groups, family groups come and actually, just like this, show them these things which are so valuable, yet you make it so accessible. Why did you choose to do that?
Well, I didn't know I was going to do this, but that's what it's evolved to. And it's very rewarding. And I now consider these a stewardship. I'm hoping that Joseph Hiram Samuel and all of the others will be very pleased that their books weren't put into some vault, never to be seen by another human, but they are a source of inspiration and testimony building to those who see them. And I've kind of extended that on to, okay, this bookstore has been successful. What can we do to help others? I went on my mission to South America, and so I'm actively involved with a humanitarian group, Generations Humanitarian, and any profits we get, and we've committed to feed about 1,000 children a day. And so when you look at that, I can look back and say, okay, this is what I always want to do. I have the ability to share and inspire people with literature and history, but then also financially be able to help those less fortunate.
Reid, I really appreciate you taking the time. If people want to find you, you can find them online, Moon's Rare Books, also social media. You share pictures and images that people can see. And if they happen to be coming through Provo, I would highly recommend people taking the time to come. Well worth your time. I so appreciate you taking the time to do it. Reid, thank you so much for taking the time.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.